we have to really start with how fundamentally powerful culture is, all forms of culture, including visual art, music, language.
We can rebuild buildings, we can rebuild bridges, we can rebuild schools, but if we do not incorporate our story, our art, and our culture, and our history.
A cultural framework. The theme for our community is community, culture, and commerce. And that's not just what Ashe says, that's what everybody says.
The creative placemaking work is not about arts and culture on its own, but arts and culture as it is integrated in how we think of healthy communities.
What's important to you, what's important to me, how might we use arts and culture to advance our joint missions?
Hello, I'm Béatrice, Odunlami. I'm Deputy Mayor of Orléans in France, and I'm with Sophie Ferkatadji, Director of the Culture of the City of Orléans. And we are very happy to be there with you and to share this moment, this very interesting moment around the French languages. So if you want, I can continue in French. And perhaps Joseph could translate if it's necessary. So, nous sommes ici pour vous parler d'un événement qui s'appelle les Voix d'Orléans. Je vais peut-être situer un petit peu Orléans. Alors, je remercie aussi Monsieur le Président de nous recevoir ici chez lui. Alors, Orléans en France, c'est une ville donc, qui se trouve à 1h15 à peu près au sud de Paris. Et c'est une ville pleine d'histoire, notamment parce qu'elle accueille les châteaux de la Loire.
So, my name is Sophie Odunlami. She's the deputy mayor of the city of Orléans, Béatrice, sorry. And they are here, actually, very happy to be here to present an initiative they do called the Voices of Orléans. So just to situate you a little bit, Orléans is about an hour and a half to the southwest of Paris, in the very middle of France. And so it's a place where people come with all kinds of artistic and cultural backgrounds.
Et donc, à Orléans, évidemment, on parle le français, mais ça rassemble des gens, et la France rassemble des publics qui sont divers et variés. Et cet événement, pour nous, est un événement central qui met en valeur l'aspect de la francophonie et comment est-ce que aujourd'hui le français sert de véhicule de partage entre les gens. Et donc on a souhaité créer cet événement qui s'appelle les Voix d'Orléans.
And one of the things I forgot to say before, if you think about the chateau in France, it's kind of around where their area is. So their conceptualization of this is knowing that there are so many people from so many varied and diverse backgrounds that live in Orléans. This idea to bring all these people together to share their, in French and around the French language, all of their different experiences, their different lived experiences, their different cultural experiences. And so we're happy that we decided to put this event together to bring people together in all their diversity.
Alors l'origine, le point de départ a quand même été un moment qui a été difficile pour la France en fait. C'était 2015 avec les attentats qu'il y a eu en France où effectivement la liberté a été attaquée puisque le journal Charlie Hebdo, qui est important en France, a été attaqué. Alors il y a eu Charlie Hebdo, il n'y a pas eu que Charlie Hebdo, mais c'est vrai que ça a été un point de départ pour se dire qu'il fallait peut-être qu'on reparle des valeurs de la France, de ce qui nous réunit et comment est-ce qu'on peut en parler de manière apaisée et donc en utilisant ce qu'on appelle, nous, les idées.
This was all born out of some tragic events in France in 2015 when the Charlie Hebdo magazine was attacked, when the terrorists went in and completely shot up the building and killed a lot of the journalists who worked there. Charlie Hebdo is really almost a national institution as a think tank for expression, free expression. And so we understood then that our whole value system was being attacked, liberty of expression, freedom of expression, and all of that. So our idea was to come around these thematics of the battle of ideas, or the ideas fighting against each other.
Et donc pour cela, le français et les voix francophones se rassemblent et on a souhaité les rassembler pour pouvoir parler de sujets comme la liberté d'expression, la liberté de conviction, le libre arbitre, l'égalité entre les êtres humains et la fraternité entre les peuples. Et tout ça à travers le véhicule de la langue française.
So bringing all these different people with all these different backgrounds together to discuss these thematics, and these are people coming from 5 different continents where French is spoken. So we're really focusing on freedom of expression, freedom of values, free will, equality among human beings, and fraternity among people.
Et donc en 2016, nous avons créé cet événement Les Voix d'Orléans. On pourrait peut-être mettre un petit passage de vidéo pour montrer un petit peu à quoi ça ressemble.
Meetings between people. And they're from Madagascar. This lady's from Senegal. And those are Romanians. This someone's Tunisian.
À ce moment de conclusion, dans ces temps où beaucoup ont besoin de points de repère, à travers toutes les émotions que vous avez réussi à faire passer, tous ces éléments-là derrière, l'acte c'est qu'il faut absolument continuer et vous allez porter, et c'est ce que je vous demande, c'est de porter justement le fait que à travers ces 2 jours, des femmes, des hommes se sont rencontrés pour parler en particulier de cette situation des femmes, comment est-ce qu'elles conçoivent le monde, et que les mots de liberté, d'émancipation, c'est ce qui vous réunit, et c'est ce qui réunit votre amour pour le français et pour la France et pour la liberté d'expression que...
So a group of women were brought together to discuss women's issues and how through the French language they're able to express these ideas of emancipation and women's rights.
C'est un message très fort et je crois que ce sera un très joli thème pour l'année prochaine. Mille merci à toutes celles qui ont organisé.
And this is the mayor of Orléans.
Et puis voilà, je vous embrasse tous.
Donc voilà, c'est cette idée-là de rassembler donc, des gens de partout dans le monde. Vous avez vu, il y avait différents pays représentés, mais tous autour de la langue francophone.
et de l'univers francophone pour parler de ces valeurs, alors avec des sujets qui peuvent être divers et variés, mais qui sont toujours autour de ce débat d'idées. Donc ça a été les femmes et la francophonie, ça a aussi été le sujet des frontières. Comment est-ce que le langage et la langue française est parlé dans le monde, dans plein d'endroits différents, mais c'est en lien aussi avec la culture, avec, on en a parlé ce matin, l'esclavage et le véhicule de cette langue qui est passé dans plein d'endroits différents. Donc ce sont des sujets que des femmes et des hommes, pendant 2 ou 3 jours, débattent et en tout cas échangent et essayent de trouver une manière de se projeter ensemble sur le futur.
So as you can see, there were lots of different speakers from lots of different places, and in this particular case, we were really focused on women and women's issues, and that's what we were talking about this morning. You're also talking about slavery and all those different things that people all around the world are talking about. But these people coming together around the French language to express these ideas and to have these discussions and these debates around these thematics.
Je vais laisser la parole à Sophie sur les thématiques qui ont été abordées depuis 2016.
So Sophie's now going to talk about the different thematics that have been talked about since 2016.
Hello, I'm Sophie. I'm very pleased to be with you today. So now we're going to speak in French. Donc les Voix d'Orléans, c'est un rassemblement de chercheurs, d'universitaires, d'artistes et d'écrivains qui viennent des 5 continents.
The Voix d'Orléans is a group of researchers and university people who come from different disciplines around the French-speaking world, which is represented actually from 5 different continents.
Chaque année, nous choisissons une thématique à développer. La première année, donc, la thématique était sur les femmes. Comment les femmes pensent le monde, comment le monde pense les femmes. La deuxième année, nous avons travaillé sur la question des frontières dans un contexte d'actualité sur les migrations, sur les murs qui se montent dans le monde. Et sur aussi, à côté de ça, une globalisation commerciale et une globalisation de la communication. Cette année, en 2018, le thème était le progrès scientifique, le progrès technique, le progrès technologique, en quoi est-il utile à l'homme? Donc, à chaque fois, nous faisons venir des philosophes, des sociologues, des historiens, des géographes, des mathématiciens, des biologistes, vraiment dans tous les domaines du savoir, et également des écrivains et des artistes, parce que nous voulons donner un aspect sensible aussi à cet événement, qui est un événement des idées, un événement intellectuel, mais le sensible est absolument nécessaire aussi pour comprendre le monde.
In the first year, we chose the thematic of women. So we had all these women come together to discuss these issues of how women think about the world around them. How does the world think about women? The next year, we were talking, or last year, in 2017, about all these different frontiers and these barriers. Is the world open? Is the world closed? All these different kinds of walls that are put up, both literal and figurative. And this year is all about progress. So how is technology and all these things actually useful to humankind, and how are we engaging with those different kinds of technologies? Voilà.
Et l'année prochaine, en 2019, nous avons déjà choisi le thème, ce sera sur la question de l'information. Est-ce que informer, c'est éclairer les esprits? Est-ce que c'est faciliter le libre arbitre? Ou bien est-ce qu'au contraire, aujourd'hui, on n'est pas dans un monde de l'information qui est parfois une manipulation des esprits?
And for next year, we've chosen the theme of information, and are we being informed at all costs? And so, is this information that we all have immediate access to actually illuminating, or is it manipulating people? constantly at our fingertips.
Voilà, sur cette photo, vous pouvez voir qu'il y a un public nombreux. Le public orléanais, mais bien sûr le public partout dans le monde, est très curieux de connaître. Les gens ont besoin de comprendre, en fait. Ils ont besoin d'avoir accès justement à une parole universitaire, une parole d'écrivain qui soit différente de la parole des médias. Et donc on voit bien un public très présent et très participatif.
The other thing that for the previous slide, and I need to come back to this, was not only are there university people and there are intellectuals engaged in these kinds of discussions, there are also artists brought in and writers brought in, because it's very important when discussing all these things, not just to have the intellectual thought behind it, but also to have that part of sensibility and the humanness of all of these kinds of discussions. And so you can see in this image that there is a very mixed group of people. They're different ages, they're very engaged, they want to know what's going on, they want to actually be able to engage with the people who are creating thought, or creating art, or creating literature.
Donc c'est un événement annuel qui est conçu par la direction de la culture à la tête de laquelle je suis, et c'est un événement donc, qui se veut un événement culturel et qui s'inscrit dans une politique culturelle qui est la vie des idées. La vie des idées, c'est les voix d'Orléans, mais c'est aussi tout le travail qui est fait avec les bibliothèques par exemple, mais également toutes les conférences qui sont données par les musées, par les instituts d'enseignement artistique. Donc ça, c'est un élément fort de la politique culturelle de la ville d'Orléans. C'est un événement donc, qui est aussi pour partager des cultures. C'est la raison pour laquelle c'est un événement francophone. On n'attend pas seulement la vie de la France, mais on attend la vie du monde francophone. Et ça, pour nous, c'est très important d'avoir des retours de personnes qui sont d'Afrique du Nord, d'Afrique subsaharienne, du Québec, où on a souvent des Québécois qui nous rejoignent, d'Haïti, où on a également des Haïtiens qui nous rejoignent, mais aussi de l'Asie, avec la culture française aussi qui perdure dans certains pays d'Asie.
This is a big undertaking, not only from the city of Orléans, but from the metropolitan region, and it brings together all the different institutions, arts, the museums, all of these different places. So we're really at the service of all these different ideas that are being brought to the table, and at the service of the French language, which is carrying all of these different values of universality. So it's an event to share cultures and viewpoints from people from all over the world. I'm just going to talk really loudly because I do better that way. So all over the world. So there are North Africans coming from the Maghreb, and there are people coming from Asia, from the former French-speaking places there. There's lots of Haitians, lots of Québécois. So it is really open to everybody to come and to share their points of view in the French language.
Effectivement, l'idée c'est de représenter la diversité aussi dans l'expression francophone. On voit Madagascar, Togo, Gabon, Italie, Québec. C'est très important. C'est très important aussi de ne pas imposer quelque chose et que les idées puissent être véhiculées et puissent être partagées pour en sortir quelque chose de commun à la fin de ces conférences.
It's very important for us that there be a very diverse group of people, because one of the main things that we do not want to do is impose any sort of idea from one particular place. We want everyone to have their voice, no matter where they're coming from.
Alors quand je disais qu'on ne voulait pas imposer une pensée, ça amène aussi à la création de nouvelles choses, et notamment en fait en a découlé donc après la première édition la création et l'initiative d'un parlement des écrivaines francophones, et donc notre maire, accompagné des personnes qui étaient présentes et des écrivaines qui étaient là, ont décidé de lancer une instance pour les femmes écrivaines pour qu'elles puissent prendre la parole, et elles sont bien souvent minoritaires, donc c'est un événement et un élément important de créer ce parlement des écrivaines francophones.
French-speaking women writers from all over the world, because these are people who are oftentimes marginalized. They're not as much in the public eye, so this is a very important thing that's born out of our Voix de la Francophonie.
Et donc ce sont 80 à 100 écrivaines de langue française issues de 5 continents qui seront donc accueillies à Orléans pour formuler une parole sur les affaires du monde, ses injustices, ses silences, ses espoirs et son futur.
These are 80 to 100 female French-speaking writers from the 5 different continents where French is spoken who were brought to Orléans in sort of a think tank environment to address all these different kinds of issues about what's going on in the world, injustices, silences, and their hopes.
Alors, pour conclure, effectivement, c'est une initiative très ouverte, très libre, qui, je l'espère, apporte, et ça c'est sûr, on en a déjà vu grâce aux échanges, parce que c'est ça aussi, les gens se rencontrent lors de ce moment autour de la francophonie, donc c'est quelque chose d'important. Et ce qu'on a souhaité aussi, c'est que ces conférences soient disponibles et que les gens puissent en avoir connaissance, et elles sont filmées et disponibles donc sur Internet, et on peut revoir en fait les différentes conférences qui existent et les différents sujets qui ont été abordés tout à l'heure sur les frontières, sur la femme et la francophonie, sur le progrès, et vous pouvez les retrouver sur Internet assez facilement sur YouTube en tapant les Voix d'Orléans.
It's really important for us, in conclusion, and also just to say to you that we want what's happening there to be available to everywhere. So all of the different conferences and all of the different roundtables are filmed. So they are available online on YouTube, so you can pretty easily find them just by typing Voix d'Orléans, which you see, or Les Voix d'Orléans, which you see right there. So you can go and explore and discover for yourself what has come out of these discussions over the last 7 years.
Donc chez nous, Orléans, la francophonie comme élément de partage sur les idées. Je vous remercie.
Where we are, the French language and the French-speaking world is an essential access for the sharing of ideas and values. And thank you very much for having us today. I am going to jump in now, and I'm actually going to speak in English, because a lot of the stuff I have to say, I actually have to say it so that it's understood from an English-speaking perspective, because I do a lot of paradigm flipping. And so one of the things that, and I didn't present myself, so I'm Joseph Dunn. I've worked in the area of tourism and culture in Louisiana for a little bit more than 20 years, and I was previously director of Odunlami for 3 years, between 2011 and 2014, before getting sort of more into the consulting side, where I still do tourism product development, and always with something to do with French and Creole in Louisiana. And when I was at Odunlami, one of the things that I was charged with, obviously, was how to revitalize the French language in Louisiana. And we've been doing lots of things, especially in the education field, for the last 50 years now. But we haven't done very much in the way of social or economic or political development of the French language. And so I had to begin to try to understand how linguistic identities were expressly deconstructed here in Louisiana in order to be replaced by English-speaking identities and American identities. So if you want to revitalize a heritage language, you have to figure out how and why it disappeared, and then begin to build that back up. So one of the things that we don't understand in this country, as English-speaking Americans, is that we are programmed through the education system to have a national identity, a national American identity in English. And we don't have the concept in the United States of linguistic identity, because we're American, we speak English, and that's kind of it, right? And that's really kind of the case in all places where there is a majority language. When we think of minorities in the United States, we think of skin color. We don't necessarily think of language. So how do we begin to think about the French or the Creole languages in Louisiana as minority languages and what that means and how we go about using those to revitalize this concept, to revitalize it. So until very recently, historians who studied Louisiana were looking at Louisiana through a very white Anglo-Saxon Protestant English-speaking lens. So it's only been in the last 25 years or so that they begin to switch that a little bit and look at Louisiana basically as an extension of the French colonial experience and also as the Spanish colonial experience, but a place where people had other linguistic identities. So who speaks French and Creole in Louisiana? It's very, very varied. There are white people, there are black people, there are people with mixed race ancestry, there are Native American people, so it's very, very diverse. It's not like, for example, in Quebec, where you might have had some Native or First Nations who were speaking French, but most people were white. Most of the people who speak French in Manitoba or Saskatchewan or in Acadie are white. But here, we've got a whole mosaic of people who all of them speak French. So it's very diverse and it's very complex. So there's the French writer, Odunlami, says, the question of identity is often the source of, or the consequence of a language change. So what that basically says is when your language changes, your entire identity changes. And that has happened here in Louisiana over the last 100 years or so. So for those of you who are U.S. citizens here in this room, what's that big thing that happens in 1803? What do we call that? We call it the Louisiana Purchase. Just that term, Louisiana Purchase, is somebody else coming here to buy something, right? So even for those of us who've been in Louisiana since the colonial period, and my family's been here since the 1740s, that's a very white Anglo-Saxon Protestant westward expansion manifest destiny term. For our people who were here, it wasn't the Louisiana Purchase. It was actually the sale of Louisiana. So when you flip these paradigms, just flip the words around a little bit, it changes completely. It changes completely your relationship to yourself, your relationship to your space, and your relationship to historic events. So, but language is also very political, right? And so, if we start thinking about teaching school children the sale of Louisiana, all of a sudden, they're not being programmed as American English speakers anymore. They're being then taught how to see Americans as others, right? How many of you in the room had your grandparents or even your parents called people who didn't speak French Americans? So what does that mean? That means that they were the foreigners, they were the immigrants. How many times do you hear the term American immigrant? No. But Americans were immigrants and Americans were foreigners into Louisiana, considered as such until a couple of decades ago by many people. Right? So, anyway, continuing on. So, I've used these resources a lot, and these are books that most of you are probably really familiar with. They're excellent, excellent resources. But I took information in these books and I actually made an image for you that illustrates the complexity of the diversity of the French and Creole language-speaking groups here in Louisiana. So this says makeup of French and Creole-speaking Louisiana. So first, they're Native people. The French arrived to found the colony in 1699. They were Canadians at the same time. Senegambien slaves were brought in the 1720s to build the colony. People from Alsace, which is up in northern France, constantly going back and forth between France and Germany, arrived. People from Lorraine arrived. Belgians arrived. Swiss people arrived. The Spanish arrived in 1763. The first Acadians don't arrive in Louisiana until 1764. And let me get a little bit further down. Then the Gaye. So these are the people who leave what is now Haiti. 10,000 of them, double the size of New Orleans in 1809. By comparison, the Acadians were 3,000 people only. Only 3,000 people who arrived in Louisiana over a 20-year period. So when we think about terms of cultural and linguistic impact, these people, historically, had much more historical and linguistic impact than the Acadians did. So, here's what's fun. Before the Civil War in the 19th century, all of these people live under the Creole umbrella. They all live under the Creole label. You know why? Because Creole for them meant they weren't American. This idea of Creole identity in Louisiana emerges as an inclusive linguistic identity after 1803 as a reaction to all of the Americans who were flooding into Louisiana, trying to take land and trying to change everything else around. But then we get what we call the foreign French, who are arriving throughout the 19th century. And then, boom, there's the Civil War and the Reconstruction period. Now, during the Civil War, New Orleans, the entire region of the Mississippi River, is occupied by the Union Army. But who are the Union Army? Who are they? Are they Creole? Who are they? They're Americans. They're Americans. And the troops speak English. So this military occupation lasts for about 18 years or so. And so at that time, there's going to be lots of stuff happening in New Orleans and all along the river, where they're imposing English in administration, they're imposing English in schools, this, that, and the other. And so the paradigms begin to shift. And now, people in Louisiana are going to start, in this new American context, in this new American paradigm, to identify along racial and ethnic lines and not along linguistic lines, right? So, the white Creoles emerge as white Creoles. So these were the political and economic power structure of New Orleans and the river region. Creole of color becomes the people who before were enslaved Africans who spoke Creole. They weren't African Americans, they were Creole. Because their linguistic and cultural identity was French, it wasn't American, right? And so the Acadians began to emerge there as well as a separate group a little bit. But here we get down into the 20th and 21st centuries, where you have all these different people coming from other places where French was historically spoken. People that come now into America and Louisiana, they immediately assimilate and become American. They don't maintain any sort of French-speaking background. Now we get back up into the Native Americans, right? So all of these groups and others are speaking French also. And the white Creoles are going to become American because they're trying to regain their foothold economically and politically. The Creoles of color now become the standard bearers for Creole identity, and the Acadians become Cajun. Now, what's interesting is that as we've moved forward in time, in this new way of thinking about ourselves, neither Creole nor Cajun today means French speaking. They did historically. But now, instead of linguistic identities, they've become ethno-racial and genealogical identities. They no longer really have anything to do with the languages in which they were born. Ratio to ethnic population today, the United Homa Nation is the largest French-speaking group of people in the state. We divide everybody up. Because of the 17,000 members of the tribe, 40% of them still speak French in their daily lives, and that's because they were subject to the same racial segregation laws as people of color. So they couldn't go to school until the late 1960s. They had no access to education. So they were able to maintain their French in their isolated communities a little bit longer than the other groups. And now, today, we have these kids out here who are the children in the immersion schools who don't necessarily have an attachment to any of these languages. Because now all of these kids are 100% assimilated American English speakers. So what is it about all of this? So if we take, I'm going to show you a slide here in a second, but how do we figure out ways to anchor these kids now who've gone through these immersion schools or in French as a second language programs? How do we anchor them in this language that they learn when they're not speaking French at home? When there are no social economic opportunities for them in French, when French is an artificial thing that they do in schools. See? Okay. So, I'm going backwards. So, coming back to that. So, before 1921, I have to go back to 1916. In 1916, in Louisiana, public education becomes mandatory. Everybody has to go to school. Remember that big complex thing I just showed you? So at this point, they're all going to go to school. The white kids go to school, the black kids go to school, the Indian kids go to school, but they go to segregated schools. They don't go to the same school. So number one, the French-speaking white kids go to white school. The French-speaking black kids to a black school. The French-speaking native kids to a native school. They're separated and segregated from their language peers, right? And then in 1921, a new state constitution in Louisiana is going to mandate that English be the language of public education. Now, you might have heard that it became illegal to speak French in public schools in Louisiana. That's not true. It's a legal subtlety, but what happens in 1921 is that French and Spanish, which are both heritage languages in Louisiana, French and Spanish are going to be relabeled foreign languages. So if you look at a high school or a college catalog in Louisiana, it's going to say foreign languages, French and Spanish. These are not foreign languages in Louisiana, they're heritage languages. So imagine if we saw language in Louisiana in the same way that we see our food, the same way that we see our music, as cultural assets and cultural resources that are renewable, right? And we address them as heritage languages as part of our cultural background, not as foreign languages, which is something that is other. Our relationship to French as a foreign language is an English language American construction. I know this is really heady stuff for a lot of, but yeah. All right. So, a lot of you have seen this. This is in Vermilionville, in the schoolhouse. People who had the right lines, I will not speak French, in the school grounds. And this is forced assimilation. All of these school children were assimilated forcibly to speak English. They were punished, they were ridiculed, and they were told by non-French speaking Americans that their language was a bastard language. And they repeated that for generations. Did you ever play the game in school when you were in first grade or kindergarten where you say, okay, we're going to tell Robert today that he doesn't look good, and by the end of the day he's going to be sick. And you say, Robert, man, are you sure you feel all right? And all your friends do that throughout the day. By the end of the day, you're sick. So, we're sick. We've been told that through several generations since 1921 in what was actually a foreign language for our people, that their language is not a real language. And this is what happens with forced assimilation. In 1919, this is the great Theodore Roosevelt, right? We intend to see that push determines our people as Americans, American nationality, not as well as in a polyglot boarding house. Well, here's the thing. When we think about this whole big great American melting pot, that concept is of immigrants coming to the United States. But it was Americans who came to Louisiana, right? It's a different, flipped way to look at how things happen here. So here are some images of some of the segregated schools. One of the things that I hear quite a bit, I'll hear people say, our parents or our grandparents did not teach us to speak French. Here's another way to think about this. We don't teach our children to speak a language. We simply speak to them. Because we don't learn language as children, we absorb it. We absorb it and we acquire it, right? And we acquire language in context. So imagine when you go to school. You're going to kindergarten, you're going to first grade, so you're 5, 6 years old. You already have a complete and total, you have the basis for the building of your language. And you build this language in different contexts, right? So you're at home. And let me just give you an illustration about teaching your children language. Have you ever seen a parent with a kid go, today, we're going to learn the verb is. I am, you are. We don't do that. We just simply talk. So you're in the kitchen and you say to your child, don't touch the stove, it's hot. So you have an object, you have a sense, and you have a command. Don't touch the stove, that's the stove, it's hot. So the kid goes and touches the stove, he knows the stove is hot because now he knows what hot is. And everything we learn in context and in situations. So by the time we go to school, we've been to the grocery store, we've been to the doctor, we've been in the car, we've been in all these very different kinds of contexts for language, and we've absorbed all of these different kinds of terms around the language that you're never going to learn in school. You'll never ever learn in an immersion class, in an immersion French classroom. You're never going to learn how to say the clutch in the car, or the shift. You're never going to learn what a stethoscope is, or what happens when you go to the doctor, or how to go to the bank. Because that's all contextual language that you absorb. And you absorb it passively. When you go to the bank, nobody tells you, this is a check. Nobody tells you, this is cash. You just hear those words, and you associate those words with objects or with situations. We absorb language in that way. So, interestingly enough, what happens over time in Louisiana, and you all know as well as I do about coastal erosion and what happens with coastal erosion. So you've got all the rivers and the levee systems now that funnel all of the rich alluvial soil off out into the Gulf of Mexico. So when those things aren't overflowing in the springtime to build the sediments back up in the swamps, and you get saltwater intrusion and the coast washes away. Right? But we have the same thing with our heritage languages. There's erosion, and that erosion is all in our different contexts. So we have lost land. All of that in red used to be land. It's not anymore. It's been washed away. And that's because of the levee systems and all the canals that were dug for logging and for oil and gas exploration and things like that. So when there's a storm, all the salt water comes in, kills the trees, the roots die, land washes away. Right? So there's that. We also have lost context in French. We don't speak French at home anymore. We might, with some of our friends, speak French a little bit, but usually only in certain kinds of contexts. We don't go to the church in French. We can maybe go to primary school in French if we're in an immersion classroom. Maybe a little bit in middle school. By high school, there's no more immersion. At the university, there are very few courses actually taught in French. We don't play sports in French. We don't have any jobs where French is mandatory or mandated. We don't have any real economic development in French. We don't do politics in French. So we can use these as comparatives. Okay? So in 1970, the U.S. Census counted 1 million people in this state who were French and Creole speakers. That was between 1/4 and 1/3 of the population of the state in 1970. Just imagine it for a second. If, in 1970, those people had had the wherewithal and the ability to come together as one large French-speaking group of people, what kind of economic and political force they might have been. But, since 1921, they had been forcibly segregated and forcibly assimilated into English. Because remember, whoever controls the language controls the economy and controls the politics. Alright? So what's happened now, come down to 2018, there's maybe 150,000 people in Louisiana who can speak French contextually. The number of people who can actually have a conversation about any kind of subject, we don't have a way to know. Because we don't go to the doctor in French. We don't go to church in French. We don't work in French. We don't have those different linguistic contexts to support. We don't have that French language ecosystem to support us. So just as salt water makes the coastline disappear, the intrusion of English has made the French and Creole speaking ecosystem in Louisiana simply disappear. There's a lot of debate about which French, and I've heard this over and over and over, but once again, here's what happens. You probably don't realize that the English that you speak here is very different from the English that's spoken in New Orleans, which is very different from the English spoken in Jackson, Mississippi, which is very different from the English spoken in Shreveport. But we don't focus on those differences in English. In French, we've made an absolute OCD mania about it. Well, Sicilian is different. St. Mark is different. And because there's 1 or 2 words, or 1 or 3 syllables that are different, we're just going to speak English. So imagine if we looked at that linguistic diversity as a real strength, and something to be developed and worked on, as opposed to something that is an excuse not to speak French. So how do we construct a linguistic identity for kids in Louisiana? When our immersion teacher might come from Africa, when the kid in the classroom is learning from a curriculum that was translated from English into French, and when the kid is from somewhere else. This kid's never going to be Cajun and he's never going to be Creole, but he can be a Louisiana French speaker. So where does he fit within all of this paradigm and all these contexts that we're talking about? I'm going to pass that. And so there are things that happen that we don't really know about, right? So, les haricots sont pas salés. CYDECO is an English language ear hearing a Creole language word. Because in Louisiana French and Louisiana Creole, the R is not pronounced like in France, it's pronounced with the tongue behind the teeth, and it sounds like a T sometimes. So, Zydeco becomes Zydeco. That's just one of the things. I do a lot of work with Laura Plantation down in Vacherie. And I was talking earlier about the slave narratives, and one of the things that we did this year for Black History Month was to take some of the stories of these people and flip them into first-person narrative. So we have somebody who's writing a story down, and we flip these into first-person narrative, and the goal was to put them in first person, but also put them in their language. So this guy's name is Edward, so I'll give you an example of what we think he might have sounded like telling his story to the white person from Washington, D.C. who was trying to hear his story. Mon nom c'est Edouard. En l'histoire créole. On t'est né dans 1835. On t'est baptisé dans l'église. Les autres nés dans l'habitation n'ont pas beaucoup qu'à devenir baptisés. Car non y est écrit dans un livre comme nous. So imagine this guy trying to get pension from the federal government, it's American, trying to tell his story and get all that taken care of. So what happens at the bottom? He actually is going to get his pension. So I'll put this for you. Les autres hommes blancs qui ont demandé mon bien des questions sur tout mon vie et mon famille et quoi c'est mon défi en guerre. Il était parlé américain. Vous t'ai répondu mon mariage. Il était écrit mon déjit sans finir fait d'esprit. Mais mon bien, mes 12 piastres par mois. Mon t'ai mouru ici dans 1906. Mon t'ai là, mon t'ai père, mon t'ai soldat, mon nom c'est quoi. So he finally gets his $12 a month, which he collects until he dies at the plantation in 1906. So we're talking about this whole concept of creative placemaking. It's important for me to talk to you just a little bit about Laura Plantation also, because we have, since the beginning of that project back in 1996, put a huge emphasis on making it a French language space, because it was the principal language spoken in that house until 1984, and we have chosen French 3 times a day. We do a very specific recruitment process to bring young French-speaking Louisianians in to work with us. And it's 20% of the visitation of the site is French-speaking visitation. And it's an economic impact of more than $600,000 a year. And it's not rocket science. We simply do tours in French. It's a natural resource. We use it. We offer tours in French. People come and consume it. It's not the result of some giant economic study. If you want mayonnaise, give somebody mayonnaise. There are people who want to consume French language products in Louisiana. So you probably know about the dictionary in 2011 that came out. What gets lost? So we already talked about these things. But our relationship to language and our relationship to things also kind of goes away. So imagine that your name is Bob. My generic American in my head is named Bob from Ohio. So imagine Bob from Ohio coming to Louisiana. He walks into what's the grocery store in Lafayette where they got really good doughboys?
Old Time.
Okay, so he walks into Old Time Grocery. So Bob from Ohio walks into Old Time Grocery and he orders a shrimp po' boy. And behind the counter they say, "Do you want it dressed?" Bob from Ohio has never ever heard of a dress sandwich before. So what is his English-speaking mind going to think? Bob from Ohio thinks that this is what a dressed po' boy looks like. It took me a long time to do that. But for Bob from Ohio, that's what a dressed po' boy looks like. But if we take the French infinitive verb, dresser, which means to build from the bottom up in layers, this is what we get. And so, like with lots of things, we've taken a French word, just stuck an American D on the end of it, and now we have a dress code word. And now, when we flip ourselves back into French, a dress code word makes absolutely perfect sense. Whereas in English, putting some drawers and a t-shirt with a pill boy doesn't work very well. Right? In New Orleans, because I'm a New Orleans boy, we often get told that we say things wrong. Like people say, why do you say that street Burgundy and not Burgundy? Because that's how you say that word in English, right? But in French, we say Burgundy. So what's happened is we just transferred the syllable emphasis from French into English. We don't say Melpomene, which is the correct pronunciation of the street. We say Melpomene, which is just a slide transfer from Melpomene in French. We don't say Calliope, we say Calliope, which is again just a strict transfer from French. So, all of this to say that in Louisiana, the baseline for identity has shifted from language and culture to race and ethnicity as a direct result of forced assimilation and heritage language laws. And the question that we all ask ourselves every day is, what is the future of French in Louisiana? Is it a springboard to the future, or is it just a mirror that we walk in front of every now and again to look into the past? So we do have about 10 minutes before we have to scoot back to New Orleans because, as you know, Béatrice is an elected official in France and one of President Macron's cabinet ministers within the city, so we have to get back to New Orleans for a reception. But we do have about 10 minutes if y'all have questions for Béatrice and Sophie or for me about the presentations that we did.
You mentioned at large education. Do you, I don't know if I misheard, do you get some of these smaller French immersion students to be the guide?
Because we try to find young people who belong to the university, but we don't have any immersions yet. But Laura is in St. James Parish in Vacherie, which is about an hour from New Orleans and an hour from Baton Rouge, and about 20 minutes from Thibodeau, so you can kind of imagine where that is. We haven't gotten any immersion students yet. But, yes ma'am.
So I have a question.
Sure.
So, as you well know, and they'll discuss it later about the hospital. So one of the things I found was the way you broke down the removal of French language from everyday life, whether it be the grocery store or whether it be the church. So having a mass in French again, or as they're doing now, I think they're doing the rotary in French, and having a market, an aisle in the market where everything is labeled in French. So you gradually start putting French back into the face of people, back into the interest of people. And so basically building back all of those little things that have been taken away would be maybe the future of French.
I think there's a lot to be said for passive absorption of language, passive acquisition, because, and I use the example of my kids, when they were little, I could draw logos on their Etch-a-Sketches and they could read them. They couldn't read, but they knew what the Schwegmann's logo said, they knew what the Chili's logo said, and it was words. So we absorb language passively also. So imagine if the stop signs, instead of saying stop, said arrête. You know that means stop. But nobody's ever told you it means stop because you just know that it means that, right? So there's a lot to be said for that kind of passive acquisition.
So we need to make it on that.
We
had a legislator,
les plus âgés par les cancer et leurs fils dans les chiffres. Arnaudville, les plus chiffres que vous voulez 1 million en 1970, 150 000 en 2018. La question que j'aimerais poser, puisque on est en train de participer à la supervision, que faire ici pour arrêter cette courage?
So he was here in 2016 and where he met older people who were speaking French but whose children didn't speak French. And the question is, so we're here to begin this whole Semaine Francophonie French-speaking week. What can we do to stop this bleed out? I think that I'm a very big believer in responsibility. I think if we want this to come back, you have to make the conscious. Every interaction that you have with every person is a conscious decision of which language you're going to speak. And if you choose not to speak French, si on choisit chaque interaction que l'on fait avec quelqu'un, il y a un choix qui se fait dans cette interaction de quelle langue on va parler. Et si on parle français, si on parle créole, et si on ne prend pas la décision consciente de parler cette langue et de la transmettre, c'est sur chacun de nous de porter en nous cette responsabilité de parler cette langue. So if we speak one of these languages, it's incumbent on each of us to not automatically default to English, but to make the conscious decision to speak French or Creole.
I think one of the things that I've observed since I've come back to Louisiana these past few years is I think eventually looking on the horizon is we're going to be faced with a very tough choice. And the choice is this. As we have francophones and we have francophiles, people who appreciate the culture, want to promote the French language, but they themselves are not fluent. And I've attended several events, including poetry readings of French poetry, where the language in which it was conducted is English. And it's done out of courtesy, out of respect for the people who either don't speak French or don't speak it well enough to feel comfortable in that kind of environment. And what I'm afraid of is, with our courtesy and our consideration, are we basically going to watch our culture die out because we're too afraid to insist on an all French-speaking event? And it's a tough choice, because how do you exclude a Francophile who's very enthusiastic about the promotion of the culture and the language, but at some point may not be able to participate in these events because they're not at that level? And so the question is, where do we go with this? I have an event on Monday. It's a lecture on the Marquis of Lafayette, and it's the person who is conducting it is a world-renowned historian on the Marquis. And it was a very tough choice for me. Do I have a larger group of English speakers or a mixed group of English and French speakers attending and have a really good turnout for this, or do I limit it to a French-speaking audience only? And I opted for the second, a French-speaking audience, which I know is going to be very small. So, we run a lot of risks when we do this, but my personal feeling is that at some point we're going to have to make a choice. What kind of culture are we going to become?
Tantôt, vous parliez de la façon passive d'enseigner le français. Au Québec, on est la seule terre, à part en Acadie, pour certains endroits, mais c'est la seule province où c'est la langue officielle du français. Et bizarrement, en France, on a des stops, chez nous, on a des arrêts. Cette forme passive-là de mettre le français de l'avant, c'est une loi chez nous, de mettre en premier la langue française. Cependant, comme vous dites, il y a les francophones, il y a des anglophones, il y a beaucoup d'anglophones quand même, surtout à Montréal, mais dans certaines régions. Ce qui a été permis, c'est de mettre dans une deuxième langue, quand on est dans un quartier chinois, dans un quartier indien, etc. On a la possibilité de le faire, mais la priorité est mise sur le français. C'est sûr qu'ici, vous n'avez pas la même réalité. Par contre, pourquoi ne pas permettre de mettre à la fois les enseignes, les bannières qui sont à la fois anglaises et à la fois francophones?
Il y a quand même
créole.
Oui, il y a une loi qui passait il y a quelques années, qui permet justement cela, mais c'est aux frais de la municipalité et aux frais de la paroisse de le faire. C'est-à-dire que l'État de Louisiane ne va pas, et quand il y a des enseignes à remplacer par exemple, la possibilité existe, mais est-ce que la volonté politique et la volonté financière chez les politiques existent?
Oui, effectivement. Tant qu'il n'y a pas une prise de position gouvernementale, que ce soit n'importe quel pays, c'est sûr que ça revient une charge qui est...
So, coming back to the whole idea of linguistic identity and all that we also don't have. How many of you saw the documentary that was done recently, the Ville's Choice, the Choix de Théo? It was a documentary that was done about. Oh, it's going to show today. It's going to show today. So one of the things that comes up constantly in that is the need for politicization of the language. And we're very afraid to talk about politics. I mean, you've always learned never talk politics and you never talk religion. But if this language is ever going to encompassing these languages, if French and Creole in Louisiana are ever going to move forward, they have to be politicized. It has to be a political movement of like-minded people who want it to move forward. And that's a scary thing. It's not only scary for the people who are doing it, it's scary for the people who are confronted with it. Because back in the early 1970s, and when I was at Odunlami, and I wish I had taken and made a copy of it, James DiMaggio had to reassure the Louisiana legislature and the American Congress that the French Renaissance in Louisiana would not lead to Louisiana becoming another Quebec. It was a political and economic threat to the English-speaking political and economic status quo, what he was trying to do. And you might also make a really good case that that's also when you see, and I've seen some studies about this as well, that's also when you see the emergence or the divergence of Cajun culture for white people and Creole for black people, because that separated people who shared a common language and a common culture into racially divided categories, and that meant that they could not come together as a political and economic group.
Mais certaines choses peuvent être quand même utilisées et adaptées à nos besoins ici.
Oui, bien sûr. Bien sûr, bien sûr.
C'est certain que la façon de le faire et de le vivre au Québec n'est pas quelque chose qui s'adapte depuis longtemps. Mais c'est ce que le Québec a fait avec la France, avec
Oh, yeah, they did. There are these great models everywhere. And the really good models for Louisiana are actually in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. The Acadian models don't work very well because the Acadians are a really, really good and organized group. Quebec, we might even think about Quebec as France. You can't compare. But Saskatchewan and Manitoba have really good community development models, very good social models, and very good economic models for French-speaking minority groups. And so, once again, it's what came out of our little thing earlier is when we were talking about the metaphors, and neither Bill nor Paula could come up with a metaphor for me. And I said, I think I like iconoclast. I like to break myths, and we've ingested and perpetuated lots of myths about our languages and about ourselves because we were told in English and because we were programmed to think of ourselves as Americans. This is, I mean, I know you're going to, I'm going to leave you thinking, my God, he's like a radical. Running out of town on a rail, but I think when you're talking about these kinds of subjects, you can't be passive about them. You're either going to jump in or you're not. And if we're really thinking about reclaiming these languages and making them relevant for all these kids, we're putting so much effort in these immersion schools. There's got to be social and professional and economic applications to anchor them in it. And we've got to be thinking long term. And I'm very bothered by the term preservation. Because for me, preservation is putting something in a jar of formaldehyde and looking at it using it. If we're not talking about development, we may as well just turn the lights off. It's got to be about development. It's got to be about creating opportunities for young people. So I apologize for being here. I'd love to stay here and talk about this week.
Hello, I'm Gaye Hamilton. As my name tag reads, the former manager of the Cultural District Program. Actually, I did that job for a long time. I did that job happily for a long time and just recently retired in February. But they haven't hired my replacement, so I'm still in. I'm still in on a volunteer basis. Really, what I'm here to talk about is creative placemaking, and it's a little bit, I'm so glad Ann Markison talked about language because everything I know about creative placemaking I really learned from her and from all these wonderful places that I've had the opportunity to work with over the years. For the second year at Semaine, we've had creative placemaking is at the core of what communities are talking about and in terms of community guiding community development. It's the newest term, but it's not new at all. And in fact, it might be as old as time, witnessed by cave dwelling drawings. I love to quote Ann Markison and Ann Gadlois from the Landmark Creative Placemaking Report done for the NEA, which describes the phenomenon. The growing attention to arts and culture as community creators and cultural industry parallels 30 years of emerging consciousness about the environment and its significance for livability and economic competitiveness. When Americans first began to understand the negative consequences of the environmental degradation back in the 70s, they started to organize and experiment with new forms of making things better and better stewardship and significant changes, by making significant changes in policy, law, and government organization. And even in the 90s, initiators of new projects began to use art and culture as a way to stem the negative aspects of outward migration and reusing land positively and developing stronger infrastructures and better places for people to live. So, places are for people. Placemaking is a process, active, intentional, and ongoing to make places better. This is the report that we've referenced so many times. The Louisiana Office of Cultural Development is based on an initiative that was undertaken by a lieutenant governor, several lieutenant governors ago, which is to develop opportunities for our constituencies to make their places better. We've taken to heart these definitions that were developed in this creative placemaking white paper, and in which NUNU's art collective is featured, as Anne described to you earlier. The defining belief for placemaking is that the programs are based on creative people. They are our most valuable resource. Creative people are diverse, they're inventive, resourceful, prolific, and they are everywhere. These two guys were in the elevator of a New Orleans hotel. And, but perhaps the most important creative people are the ones that sustain our communities. They contribute to the richness, they bring us their particular elements of skill and experience in unique ways, and we just have to engage them. Cross-sector partners is really important. The Office of Cultural Development, our mission is to preserve and celebrate the heritage of Louisiana and our people and places. We do this through a variety of programs. There are challenges in communities, in every community across Louisiana. And what does it take to turn those communities around, to make them better? It takes putting that guy in the room with those people. You need to have cross-sector pollination. Government agencies need to be involved, but so do the artists, the musicians, the business owners, and the creative folks. And our agency has several divisions: archaeology, division of the arts, codicil, and preservation. And each one of those is mandated to do certain things for the state. But through these programs, we even use cross-pollination so that the federal and state tax credits that are administered by the Office of Historic Preservation are available to our cultural districts, to communities that have applied for and been certified for cultural district designation. And we believe that our agency is stronger by working together and by collaborating across our programs, just as it happens in local governments. One of the projects that we were involved in a couple of years ago, we called it Louisiana Creative Communities Initiative, and we got a grant from the NEA, and we chose 10 communities from across the state. They met for 10 months, and they were guided by 10 coaches. One of our coaches is back here, Jennifer Guidry. And they came out with 10 plans, each unique, each based on what was unique, special, and needed in that community that could be fulfilled within that time frame. The teams were cross-sector. That was one of the requiring criteria. It had to include government, business, residents, and artists. We had them in Baton Rouge, Minden, Mandeville, Corridor des Arts, which included Arnaudville, Francophonie, and Sunset, Washington, Old Algiers, Monroe, and then Southwest Louisiana had one that included 5 parishes, and then Homa and Plattons. It was a widely successful program in some ways, and then carrying it on is the ongoing challenge. Sound Places was a groundbreaking project. It was a partnership during 2017 between Chamber Music America, the Louisiana Division of the Arts, and a national expert on placemaking, a project for public spaces. The aim was to integrate musicians in residence into community life by combining music, placemaking, and civic engagement in different, new, unprecedented ways. We wanted to educate, entertain, and bring new vitality to public places. 2 districts were chosen, 2 cultural districts were used, Opelousas and Rivertown Kenner. They each hosted a year-long residency throughout 2017, where WinSync from Houston and the Westerlies from Brooklyn went to those communities and worked with their local leaders to figure out how they could enliven places and make the project have lasting impact in areas of music and community development. The Westerlies in Kenner conducted music student camps. They collected stories from local characters and the history of the old Rivertown that they incorporated into performances at the farmers market. They did laser light show. They did their own music to a laser light show in the planetarium. So what happened in Kenner, similar to what happened in Opelousas, was they evaluated the needs of the community. There were several museums that are underutilized and underserved in Kenner, and the only bands they ever hire for any festivals or anything are cover bands. So they wanted to bring an awareness to their own rich cultural and musical heritage and better use the facilities. So by the Westerlies literally they turned off the sound for the laser light show in the planetarium and let the Westerlies perform, and they are continuing, and it was phenomenal. They just jammed to the laser lights, and they've started doing that using kids in the community now, and they're turning off the music that comes with the light show all the time. This was kind of neat too. During their year-long residency, they met a lot of wonderful people that were frustrated with their situation in this little, tiny, ignored Rivertown community. So they started recording interviews along the way and just asking local, longtime residents what were their dreams for Rivertown. The conversations became episodes that they scored original music to. So they have these little 2 and 3 minute vignettes of dreams or complaints or ideas that residents who've lived there forever. And then in the background, there's music. And it's original and it's fresh, and they've turned it into a blog that, again, is an ongoing thing. And it's something that any town, any community could do. There's so many examples of placemaking happening all over the world, and many in Louisiana, besides sound places, and of course the NUNU art collective, social sculptor George Marks, and the raft of volunteers, everything from the French programming, the tables, the potluck suppers, the craft classes, the quilting. I mean, it just is a phenomenally wonderful place to be, and it is fueled by creative people. There's so many examples. You can look through this list, but they're all over the state, from the Firehouse Project in Baton Rouge, Fiddles and Murals in Opelousas, Ile de Jean Charles, the relocation of the entire culture of people in South Louisiana. Launch Leeville, this is one of my favorite stories. Leeville is this tiny little fishing village along Highway 1 on the way to Grand Isle. The Highway 1 kept flooding out right at the foot of Leeville, and so they decided they're not going to rebuild Highway 1 anymore. And so they built a big bridge because they have to get to the Gulf, because they have to get to those big oil rigs that are out there. And it completely bypassed Leeville. Nobody came to Ville anymore. There were only a handful of businesses anyway, but it's probably got the best fishing and kayaking in the state. And nobody came there. So those few little motels and restaurants just were starting to die away. So this one woman got it in her mind that she was going to save Leeville. And so she got permission by hook and crook and by determination to build a boat launch at where the highway ends. Well, they got the money for the boat launch, and everything was moving along swimmingly until the guy that would pay boat launch up the road contacted got in touch with the parish council and stymied the funding. He literally put a hold on it because he was charging $8 a boat, and this was going to be a free public boat launch. Well, after becoming a cultural district and getting the support of the lieutenant governor and having a little art festival, and they managed to secure enough support from the politicos to get that money released, and they got the boat launch in Ville now. There's just as many examples in North Louisiana. I mean, look at that dog. That was a fire station that was turned in. The Arts Council burned in Shreveport, and they turned an old fire station, apropos, into the new Arts Council, and eventually built this wonderful Dalmatian whose spots change with the colors of the season and the weather. There's so many more stories. I can't tell all of them. But Farmerville, go to Farmerville someday. You won't believe it. Coffee on the Porch in Baton Rouge. It's a wonderful experience. This one I missed it last weekend. Be Nice Music. This is literally a neighbor on Capitol Heights Avenue that started putting lights in her backyard and inviting musicians to come, and people started coming, and they have Be Nice Music concerts 4, 5, 6 times a year. It's just wonderful. In your own backyard, Cecilia, this guy, Brandon and Morris, who knows what she's going to end up doing. She's got even better and bigger ideas. But Brandon Boulanger he's a scientist. I mean, he's a bug scientist at LSU. But he's also a naturalist, an environmentalist, a father, and he's dedicated to ecotourism. He's turned his backyard into an ecotourism destination that we should all go to. markets, main streets. Oh, the supporting organizations. If you're involved in community development, you're looking for how do you hang your hat, where do you get your feet on the ground. Don't forget the organizations that already exist. Main Street Communities, the Cultural District Program, regional art organizations. They all want to do the same thing. They all want to make places better. They all want people to come and enjoy the assets that are there and to make new assets. So connect with existing organizations. These are some of the partners that I recommend. The parish tourism offices. Louisiana has an incredible network of parish and city tourism professionals that have tiny bits of money and great resources for promoting one-of-a-kind and special events all over the state. They're wonderful. Economic development, art organizations. Get churches involved and civic organizations. Some places, Scott, one of the cultural districts, now Scott's got a lot to claim. They are the boudin capital of the world, and it's undeniable. But they also have a really active genealogy and local historical society that has been really very good resource for some of the projects that they're trying to do that are a little different. So look beyond the norm. You may recognize that guy in the foreground. You may recognize several of you in the background. This was an outreach meeting for partnerships and developing cross sectors in Grand Hotel, I believe. And it's just a perfect example that you need to mobilize the public will, you need to get those people involved, attract private sectors, you need to get the participation of nonprofit organizations that can help, economic and workforce organizations, transportation, just use any level of government that you can tap into. Find what's already good about your place and build on it. Every place has things that are the same as every other town. We've all got roads and schools and groceries and hair salons and places like that. But everybody also has something that's distinct, that's special, that's very unique. Whether it's your French heritage or your German heritage or the ginger cakes that they make down the road that everybody loves. You need to build on what is distinctive and special and then figure out how to capitalize on it and how to make it yours. Believe that diversity is a strength. And embrace the diversity in your community. It is your greatest strength. This is a little political, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. Missionary group has gone through a real trauma this last few years when he decided to take down the statues. But I have to say, I've known him for a long time when he was lieutenant governor, and the basis of his platform from the very beginning was our creative people are our best resource, and diversity is a strength, not a weakness. And we have gotten to, and he's lived it. I mean, that has not been easy. That was not an easy choice for him to make, and it has not been an easy process. But I know it is something that he believes, and I have seen the benefit of it in so many communities across that can get to where they truly do value the diversity that they've got. Identify your new unique assets and build on what's special. Yeah. I know. They are special. You cannot put a value, a price value on those women. And the network of people, the hours they spent, the things they've accomplished, you need to value those folks. And then this is the recycling, the St. Landry recycling process is amazing too. I'm not going to go into that, but engage local entrepreneurs. Find the drain company who will help you with your, the culvert guy who maybe sewers or whatever. Entrepreneurs are our bread and butter. One of them just left here earlier today, and she's amazing. And young people. We need their ideas, we need their social media skills. We need to listen to their hard questions and answer them and consider their ideas in making plans. Also, create a sense of openness, welcoming new voices no matter what age they are. These were 3 women, George, who painted outside last year after your idea about implementing painting. They were up in Ruston and painted. And I think they're painting again this April sometime, I'm not sure. Build an art-rich place, use professional partners, businesses, and established resources. And there's a lot of resources that you can take advantage of. Delta Regional Authority is a good one. Louisiana, the Cultural Economy Foundation, yes, but what I was really wanting to talk about were the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, the Canadian Foundation, and those kinds of regional think tank type people that can help make projects happen. That's really what I wanted to say.
So earlier, going back to that photograph and talking about the importance of plugging into the political piece, it's important. A lot of times, we kind of do what we do and think that everyone's going to follow, but we have to kind of be aggressive in how we move people in. For example, Semaine de la Francophonie has evolved over the years. The first French week we did, the bulk of it was in French. But what we realized was that we had created this unattainable vacuum that would not exist beyond the French week. And so it challenged us, and what we wanted to do was to develop projects that were in French that could then be presented over time. And so little by little, we could replace the English component with the French component. And so this year, for the first time, we've expanded into 5 different communities. And the reason for that is because we were trying to challenge those communities to identify their French cultural assets and develop their French projects that then can fit into Semaine de la Francophonie over time. It's our hope that over the next few years we'll touch every community in Acadiana. So that way at the end of the day or at the end of the decade or whatever it is, we will have touched each one, and each one will have a product or a project that they can claim as their own that is in French. And that makes up the French fiber or tapestry or whatever it is that we have here in Acadiana. A big part of that goes back to St. Luke, the St. Luke Rich Immersion and Cultural Campus. And we know that in order for that program to be successful, we need students. And we need teachers. And we need people to plug in, to be able to plug into it. And that should come from the local community. And when I say local, I'm talking all of Acadiana. Davis, would you talk about St. Luke for a little bit? Would you mind?
So, you've all been here, most of you have been here all day long. In the next group, this wall has little signs that Larry Ward, who's such the artist, anytime we have a school coming, Larry, would you make us a welcome sign? So he gets on the computer and he finds their logo and he finds their colors and he makes freehand. So please look at them because they're awesome. They're kind of our history. Because when those students come, and I have to say, we never solicited, we never sought any school to come here. We had LSU who came and looked at that hospital building. 5 times LSU has come and looked through that building and said they had an interest. And one of our good friends, Amanda LaFleur, who was teaching Cajun French at LSU, they said, Amanda, if you want to take that project, you'll be the teacher and we'll send the students. So every year, this will be our 5th year this year, we get maybe 12, 15 students from LSU, and Amanda and I do the program. I'm the old Cajun woman, so I make the prawns and the sweet dough pies. Amanda knows how to crawfish with her rubber boots and cane pole, and she teaches them how to do that. And some of these kids, they're not all from Louisiana. You know, they're at LSU, but they're from all over the world. And they say it is the most wonderful cultural experience that they've had during their time in Louisiana. So, but to go back to those signs that Larry makes, we get the students to all put their names and the dates, so it's our history. And he always puts them up on the wall, so we'll see who has been here. And Bucknell University, I can't even think.
University of Indiana.
Indiana, Minnesota, NYU has come twice with 15 students and 2 professors. They've come 2 years. New York, this was St. Lawrence University.
Wharton Business School.
The Wharton School of Business. But and we've had other schools from, we've had Bretons, the kids from France that came, and from Haiti, from the Dominican Republic. It's amazing. We didn't seek these people out. They read about us, and they were part of it. Now, we had one guy from Indiana who has moved to Minnesota, and he has already booked for March of next year. He knows he wants to do this. He even came to spend some time with us last month and reserved his days. He just loves the project.
How many students?
He came the first time with 6. He wants to come with 25 this time. Well, where are we going to put 25 students? So we're so hoping that we can get in that hospital building that has been sitting idle. If you don't think politics is something else, it has been sitting idle for 10 years. It is shameful. It is absolutely shameful. But that's my grand rêve, that we would be in that building someday before I get too old to walk through the doors. I mean, well, see this happen, because my goodness, there's such an interest. It would do such wonderful things, not just for Arnaudville people. That would be the whole of Louisiana. This would impact. It's just, it could be so wonderful. It could be so wonderful. And the kids that have come, it's amazing. They come back with their parents to visit here. It's tourism. It's the economy. It's helping the French language survive. It's so many things. Anyway.
Thank you.
So as it stands now, the hospital board, of course, has been dissolved, which was the big holdup. They're actually doing environmental studies right now. We've already met with the Community Foundation of Acadiana, and as well as the foundation, the Baton Rouge Area Foundation. So things are moving, albeit slowly. However, it took 9 years to get where we're at. So it takes 1 or 2 more, as long as Mavis is still kicking. You know, we're good to go. But one of the things that we came up with, or actually T.L. Richie from LSU came up with, I think, was how important it would be to actually give something that people could visualize. What would this place look like? And so T.L.'s going to talk a little bit about a project we worked with LSU on.
Can you all hear me without this? Yeah. Is this good? Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. Let me do one thing. I didn't know what George wanted me to do today until I got here. So I didn't have any images, but what I did bring is I brought my copy if anyone wants to look at what I'm going to talk about. I teach in the School of Art and Design at LSU. I teach interior design, interior architecture. And I like to do outreach projects in the community with our students. I do a lot of adaptive reuse, historic preservation kinds of projects. So I was nosing around for a project, and a friend told me about St. Luke's, and I heard George was involved in it, and I had known George for a while. I thought, oh, this is a project. So I came up one day, and that's all I had to do. George got his hooks in me, and the project blossomed. And then I met everyone here, and my idea is, in Gaye's wonderful talk about creative placemaking, my idea is how can you educate the students while they're in the university to have good habits in terms of designing, whether it be for individuals or for a community. How can you do it so that it is creative placemaking and it's not designing the typical or a stereotype of what they think it should be. It's not designing in a vacuum. So the first thing we did was, the first thing you do in any kind of community outreach project, and this was a wonderful project because it has to do with the French immersion, it has to do with a unique, vibrant community. It was a sort of community center, it was a sort of hospitality, it had educational components, possibly a business incubator. I mean, they were just tossing out things to me. So the first thing that you typically do with students is have them do like what we call an abbreviated literature reviews and precedent studies. So they go, they research that type of project, or in this case, they had to look at a lot of different types of projects that might have these components, so they could see what is out there. They look at what we call precedents, which are buildings that have been built or projects proposed that are a similar type. So they can see the state of the art of what's going on in the field in terms of that. Well, and they can look at it, see what the needs are, what spatial needs are, and those sorts of things, the aesthetics, those sorts of things. Now, typically when students do that, and these were seniors, then they know it. They know what the needs are. Well, then what we usually do is give them what we call a program. And it is the list of uses in the building, the goals for the building, the spatial needs, the square footage, what sorts of things activities are going to go on in here. Well, we didn't really have a program. And so that was exactly what I was hoping. So I said, well, you've got to take from your research, start writing what you think a French immersion community center would need. So they did that. It's kind of their recipe. And then I said, well, make some, but they had all these holes. Well, we don't know this, we don't know that. So they set about making up questions. Mavis and George and all the people in the community, George set up a sort of advisory panel for us. So we all packed up, came to Arnaudville, and met with the people, asked their questions. They had great questions. They were totally amazed, working with actual clients. And another piece of this project was working with the landscape architecture students, a fourth year group, worked with us for the first 6 weeks. They came also, and the two groups after the meeting went out and kind of drove around and looked at the region. What they were going to do is look at regional resources. What are the resources? What are the opportunities? What are the constraints in the two parish area that could support this kind of a project? So they went and did that together. It was an awkward pairing, but they turned out they had a lot of fun. And they did that. Then the landscape students went and did proposals of different things that might support the center, like tourism type things, activity things, adventure things, like waterway on the waterways, a boat trip sort of thing, hike and bike trails, kayaking, gardens, walkways and park areas, little pocket parks in the town. They made all these proposals that they ended up bringing back to the community later. And our students had to go, they also went over to the building on this visit because there was not a complete set of drawings for the building. So the students had to, they went, looked at the building, photographed, we got what different pieces of drawings existed. And they went back, and part of this project was to recreate a set of drawings that they could start with so they could design. So they learned by talking to the community what the community wanted. And it's not always one thing, different people have different needs. But they were able to go back and synthesize that and come up with a program. They did the drawings. And then it was the students that said, this community is so wonderful. They got engaged with the community and said, this community is so wonderful. Can we go back for a weekend? We want to see some of this stuff and do some of this stuff. So we ended up coming back. We organized, they came, they all got bed and breakfast. We came back. We had another activity where they divided the community up into sectors and went out in teams and sought out the business people and talked to them, looked at the businesses, looked at what was here, talked to the business people about, unsolicited, about what the opportunities in the town were, what they wanted, what they thought their needs were, what they thought we'd think about this sort of a center. And came back, they engaged again with some of the people of the community who told stories and cultural kind of tales, read poems and things like that. So they again got to know the feel of the uniqueness. Then they sat down and did a creative collage exercise here. And they had a wonderful gumbo lunch. And they sat in the back and made collages of the feel, the texture, the colors, just the impression of the community. We sort of captured those feelings in a creative way. And then each of the students went back, and each student did their own design, adaptive reuse of that building and what it would be and what as a French immersion cultural center. And we ended up having an exhibit at the end of the semester with the landscape drawings and each student's drawings. Those students, it was a different kind of placemaking. It was a creative placemaking. It was a placemaking that involved the community, and they were engaged in that process. It changed them, you know. It really changed them. They always talk, I have those same students now for their senior projects, and they always say, oh, that was a special project. That was a special project. We were so engaged in that community. And it makes them think differently about who they design for. So thank you all.